The Mafia boss came home early and almost fainted when he saw what his black maid was doing. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Mafia boss Dominic Castellano made a rare decision. After a long and exhausting meeting with his associates, he decided to come home early. As he pulled into the long driveway of his luxurious estate, he could feel the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. The large mansion loomed ahead, towering over the neatly manicured grounds. It was a place that exuded power and wealth, but there was always an underlying sense of emptiness for Dominic. His wife, Maria, was rarely home, and the staff kept to themselves. As he entered the front door, he expected nothing more than a quiet evening, perhaps a drink by the fire. But what he found shocked him. He had no idea what was waiting for him. As he walked through the large, ornate hallway, he heard something unusual: laughter. It was coming from the kitchen. At first, he thought nothing of it. But as he got closer, the laughter became clearer, and so did the voices. It wasn't his wife or any of his usual guests. No, the sound was much more intimate. Dominic's curiosity piqued, and he quietly approached the kitchen door. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. His maid, Maya, the black woman who had worked for him for several years, was sitting on the kitchen counter, surrounded by a group of stray animals. She was laughing softly, her voice warm and kind, as she fed them scraps of food. Her hands gently petted each animal as they crowded around her, looking for affection. Her demeanor was so different from the cold, formal behavior she exhibited in front of him and his wife. For a moment, Dominic stood there frozen, watching her in complete disbelief. Here was a woman who had always kept to herself, who was always quiet and composed, now showing a side of herself he had never seen. Maya's face was glowing with kindness, completely unbothered by the mess or the animals that surrounded her. It was as if she had found a small piece of happiness in the chaos of her life. For a brief moment, Dominic felt a pang of guilt. He had always treated Maya with a level of indifference, never truly seeing her as anything more than a servant in his house. Yet here she was, showing more warmth and compassion than anyone he had ever known. He stepped back, not wanting to intrude on the scene, but his presence did not go unnoticed. Maya turned her head and caught sight of him standing in the doorway. Her eyes widened in shock, and the animals scattered in all directions. She quickly jumped off the counter, visibly embarrassed. "Mr. Castellano, I didn't know you were home early," she stammered, her face turning red. Dominic stood there, still processing what he had just witnessed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he broke the silence. "Maya," he began, his voice soft, but filled with a depth of emotion he had not expected. I didn't know you cared for animals like that." His voice trailed off, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than the usual coldness that accompanied his every interaction. Maya looked down, unsure of how to respond. I don't know, they're just easier to take care of," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "They don't judge you. They just need love, and I can give that." Dominic felt something stir within him. He had never seen this side of Maya, and it made him realize how little he knew about the people who worked for him. How often had he overlooked the kindness and humanity of those around him, too wrapped up in his own world to notice. He glanced down at Maya, and for the first time, he truly saw her, not as a maid, but as a person. His heart softened, and a strange sense of guilt washed over him. He had never truly shown any compassion for the people who worked under him. Maya had always been just another face in the background, but now, she was someone he couldn't ignore. Something had shifted in that moment, something that would change the way he saw the world, and Maya, forever. After a brief pause, the sound of silence between them lingered in the air. Dominic Castellano stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on Maya, who was still standing by the counter, her hands trembling as she nervously wiped the last traces of food from her apron. The moment had been fragile, a mix of shock and confusion. He could still feel the pull of that strange, almost human moment. The side of Maya he had never seen before, the side that revealed tenderness and empathy in a world that was often cold and calculating. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The weight of the silence was palpable, thick with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Dominic's eyes flicked back to the spot where the animals had once been. He had always prided himself on being a man of control, of maintaining power over everything and everyone in his life. Yet here, in his own kitchen, a woman who had been nothing more than a servant to him had shattered that illusion of control with nothing more than a simple act of kindness. "Maya," he said softly, the words feeling unfamiliar as they passed through his lips. Maya turned her eyes up to meet his, her expression guarded but vulnerable. She had not expected this reaction from him. The man she had seen only as a boss, distant, powerful, and often cold, was now standing before her, not as a figure of authority, but as someone who was witnessing her vulnerability for the first time. "What is it that you're doing here?" "With the animals?" he asked, his voice not harsh, but filled with a curiosity he had not known he had. Maya shifted uncomfortably, but her heart was racing, caught between the discomfort of being seen and the overwhelming urge to speak the truth. "They were hungry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They needed help, and I just couldn't leave them out there." Dominic stood in the doorway, his brow furrowed as he processed her words. He was a man of wealth and influence, accustomed to giving orders, not listening to such simple explanations. But something about this moment made him pause. Here was Maya, this quiet, often overlooked figure in his life, offering compassion to creatures that most people would dismiss. He couldn't help but think of his own coldness. How many times had he ignored the needs of others? How many times had he brushed aside the humanity of the people around him, focused only on business and power? A pang of guilt tugged at him. He took a step closer to Maya, his movements slow, almost hesitant. "You care for them, don't you?" he asked, the question simple, yet weighted with meaning. Maya's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, she hesitated. "Yes," she replied softly, "I do. It's not much, but it's something I can give." Dominic could feel the walls of his own carefully constructed life starting to crack, just slightly, but enough for him to see beyond the surface. He had always viewed people like Maya, his staff, his servants, as simply tools to serve his needs. He had never considered what they might need, what they might feel, what they might be capable of. But now, as he stood in this kitchen, looking at Maya's tired but kind face, something was shifting inside of him. "You're not just the help, are you?" he said, almost to himself. Maya looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since he entered. There was no anger, no resentment in her gaze, just a quiet acceptance. "No, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not." Dominic nodded slowly, the weight of the realization settling on him. He had never truly seen Maya before. Not really. Not as a person, not as someone who had a life outside of his mansion, a heart that could feel, and a soul that could care. It wasn't just the animals, he realized that now. It was everything about her. The way she moved through life with grace, the way she worked tirelessly without complaint, the way she gave without expecting anything in return. For the first time, Dominic felt a deep respect for Maya, something he had never felt for any of the people who had worked for him. He wasn't sure where this feeling was coming from, or why it was happening now, but it was undeniable. His mind began to race, wondering how much more of his life he had missed by overlooking the people around him. "Maya," he said, his voice softer now, "you're not just here to clean my house. You deserve more than that." Maya looked up in surprise, her eyes wide. "Sir?" she asked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Dominic smiled, though it was a small, hesitant smile, one that held more vulnerability than he was used to showing. "I'll make sure of it," he said, his tone firm but kind. Maya stood still, unsure of how to respond. The words felt like they were meant for someone else, like they were too much for her to process all at once. But before she could speak, Dominic turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, stunned and unsure of what had just happened. As he left, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of hope rise in her chest. She had never expected this. She had never expected that one moment of kindness could cause such a shift, not just in him, but in herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she might be seen, truly seen. And for the first time, Dominic Castellano began to question the life he had built, the choices he had made, and the people he had dismissed. The story wasn't over yet, but it was beginning to change. The next few days after that strange encounter in the kitchen were filled with an uncomfortable quietness that hung in the air. Dominic found himself distracted, lost in thought more often than usual. His usual sharp focus on business seemed to blur as he kept replaying that moment in the kitchen when he had first truly seen Maya for who she was. The quiet maid who had spent years working for him, unnoticed, had shown him a side of herself that was far more complex than he had ever imagined. Maya's kindness to those helpless animals had done something unexpected to him. It had cracked open a door he had kept locked for years. A door that led to his humanity. The days went by, but Dominic could not shake the feeling that something had changed, something within him that he wasn't ready to confront. He found himself watching Maya more closely when she worked, noticing the way she carried herself, her quiet dignity, the way she interacted with everyone around her with patience and kindness. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned his house. She was someone who had a heart, someone who deserved respect. He found himself questioning his own treatment of her, his own actions, and the way he had always viewed the people who worked for him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and business deals, Dominic returned home earlier than usual. His mind was heavy with the weight of his responsibilities, but something else tugged at him. Something about the way Maya had looked at him, so vulnerable, yet full of quiet strength. He didn't know what he expected, but as soon as he stepped through the door, he could hear Maya's soft humming from the kitchen. She was alone, preparing a meal for the family. There was something soothing about the sound, and Dominic found himself following it, drawn to the warmth of the kitchen. As he stood in the doorway, watching Maya, he felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Maya was chopping vegetables with a kind of rhythm that made it seem almost like an art. She moved with grace and purpose, and for the first time, Dominic saw her as more than just a servant. He saw her as a person with her own life, her own dignity, her own value. The realization hit him hard. He had spent so many years treating her, and others, like invisible figures in his world. But here she was, taking care of his family's needs, without asking for anything in return, without even expecting gratitude. Maya. Dominic spoke her name softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned around, a little surprised, but quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Sir, is there something I can do for you?" she asked, her voice steady, though Dominic could sense the tension behind her words. She had been so composed, always so professional, that he wondered if she even had the capacity to let her guard down. "I just wanted to see if you needed anything," Dominic said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Is everything all right?" Maya looked at him for a moment, as if she was weighing her words carefully. "Everything is fine, sir," she replied, still holding the knife in her hand. "Just preparing dinner as usual." Dominic stepped into the room and leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot lately about the way I've treated you and others, and I realize I've made a lot of mistakes." Maya's hands froze for a moment as she processed his words. She didn't look at him, but there was a noticeable change in her posture. The tension that had been there before seemed to lessen, just a little. "Sir, you don't have to apologize," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I understand my place." "That's just it," Dominic said, his voice low, filled with sincerity. "You shouldn't have to understand your place. You are not just here to serve me. You have your own life, your own value, and I haven't recognized that until now." Maya's eyes flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. But she didn't speak right away. Instead, she continued chopping the vegetables, her movements slow, deliberate. "You deserve respect," Dominic continued, his tone firm, though there was a hint of vulnerability in his words. "And I'm going to make sure you get it." Maya looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. The two of them stood there, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Dominic wasn't sure what he expected from her, but he was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about him acknowledging her worth. It was about him changing his perspective on everything, on the people who had always been in his life, invisible to him, the people who had been there for him without ever asking for anything in return. "Sir, Maya began, her voice trailing off. She paused, unsure of how to respond. "I appreciate your words, but I've never needed any special treatment. I'm happy with what I do. I'm just doing my job." Dominic felt a pang of guilt wash over him. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You deserve more than that." Maya stood still for a moment, and then, to his surprise, she smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it was genuine. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice soft. But you've already given me something more than I expected. What's that? Dominic asked, his curiosity piqued. You've seen me, Maya replied simply. You've really seen me. Dominic felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this moment to be so emotional. It was just a simple conversation, but it was more than that. It was the beginning of something new. A new way of seeing the world. A new way of seeing the people in his life. And for the first time in a long time, Dominic Castellano felt like he was finally learning to look beyond the surface. To look beyond the power, the money, and the cold, calculating world he had built for himself. And he realized, as he stood there in his kitchen, that Maya's simple act of kindness had done more to change him than any business deal or negotiation ever could. Days passed since the conversation in the kitchen, and Dominic found himself unable to shake the realization that had begun to shift his perspective. Every time he saw Maya, there was a sense of unease in him, not because of her, but because of how he had treated her and others like her for so many years. He couldn't ignore the change, the awareness that had taken root within him. It was as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He now saw the people around him, his staff, as human beings with stories and feelings, not just servants to cater to his needs. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was one he knew he needed to accept. Dominic had always been a man in control, the head of a powerful crime family who ran everything with precision and power. But now, that control seemed like a hollow shell, something that had isolated him from the world, making him forget the importance of human connection and kindness. Maya, the quiet maid who had always been invisible to him, had become the catalyst for his change. It was ironic. She, who had worked in his house for so long without ever drawing attention to herself, had shown him more about life and compassion than any of his business deals ever had. One afternoon, Dominic decided he would take action. He could no longer stand idly by, feeling the weight of guilt pressing on him. He had to make things right, not just for Maya, but for himself. He asked to meet her in the kitchen again. When Maya arrived, she looked at him cautiously, unsure of what to expect. She had noticed a subtle change in him in the past few days. It wasn't that he had spoken more to her, but there was something in his eyes, something different in the way he carried himself around her. Maya, Dominic began, his voice a bit more tentative than usual. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you've always been here, doing your job without asking for anything in return. I want you to know that I've been wrong. I haven't treated you the way you deserve to be treated, and I regret that. Maya's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. She wasn't sure what to say to his apology. You don't have to apologize, sir, she replied quietly, a little surprised by his words. I've always done my best to do my job well. Dominic shook his head, frustration lining his features. It's not just about doing your job well, Maya, he said, his voice gaining strength. You're more than that. You've shown me what real kindness is, and I've overlooked that for far too long. You deserve better. I want to make sure that you get it. Maya stood still, unsure of what he meant. Her life had been simple. She did her work, kept her head down, and never expected anything more than what she had. But now, with Dominic's words hanging in the air, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. I appreciate your words, sir, she said, her voice steady but laced with caution. But I've always been content with my work. I don't need anything more than that. Dominic took a step closer to her, his expression sincere. You don't have to be content with just that. You deserve respect, a chance to do more than just serve. I'm going to make sure that happens. Maya looked down at the floor, her heart racing. She had never been one to ask for anything, never one to seek special treatment. But something about Dominic's words made her wonder. Was he really going to change? Could it be possible that he saw her as something more than just a maid? Before she could respond, Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I've spoken with my lawyers, he said, his voice calm but determined. I've arranged for you to receive a raise. And I want to offer you the opportunity to take on a more prominent role here, one where you'll be recognized for your hard work and dedication. Maya looked at him, stunned. A raise? A more prominent role? It was something she had never even dared to dream about. Sir, she began, but the words failed her. She wasn't sure how to react to such an unexpected offer. You don't have to make a decision right now, Dominic said, sensing her shock. Take your time. But I want you to know that you have a future here if you want it. I'll make sure of that. Maya stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She had always been content with her life, never expecting anything more than a quiet existence. But now, faced with Dominic's offer, she felt like she was standing at a crossroads. This was the moment when everything could change for her. As she glanced at Dominic, she saw something in his eyes, something she had never seen before. It wasn't just power or control, but something softer, more genuine. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she could begin to believe that she was worth more than just her work. "Thank you, sir," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll think about it." Dominic smiled, a small, approving smile. "Take your time, Maya. But know this. No matter what you choose, you have my respect." As Maya left the kitchen, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had never expected this, never imagined that her quiet kindness would lead to something like this. But as she walked out of the room, she realized that this moment would be the turning point in her life. And as for Dominic, he felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt in years. Hope, not just for his business, but for the future he was beginning to see with clearer eyes. Days passed after Dominic's offer to Maya, and the weight of the words he had spoken lingered in his mind. He had meant them, but now he found himself questioning how deeply the changes could reach. It wasn't just about Maya anymore, it was about him, too. Could he really make these changes in himself? Could he see the world differently, not as the powerful, untouchable man who ran a criminal empire, but as a human being who recognized the worth of others, especially those who had always been beneath his notice? Maya, on the other hand, had spent the last few days processing Dominic's offer. At first, she had felt a rush of gratitude and disbelief. The idea of being given a raise, being acknowledged for her hard work, seemed like a dream, something she had never dared to hope for. But as the days went on, doubts crept in. She had always been content with her simple life, never expecting much more than a quiet existence. Would accepting his offer change things between them? Would she still be able to work in the same house, under the same roof, with the same boss who had never seen her as anything more than a servant? Despite her reservations, she couldn't deny that the idea of being seen, truly seen, was tempting. She had worked for years without ever being acknowledged beyond her role as an employee. Now, Dominic had given her the chance to be something more. On the 5th day after their conversation, Maya finally made her decision. She had spent the night tossing and turning, thinking about what she wanted. She couldn't ignore the opportunity before her, nor could she ignore the change that had been sparked within Dominic. When she entered the kitchen that morning, she found Dominic sitting at the table, reading through some papers. He looked up as she walked in, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Maya felt a flutter in her chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "Maya," Dominic said, his voice calm, but with a sense of anticipation. "Have you had time to think about what I offered you?" Maya nodded, her hands clasped in front of her as she stood there, trying to find the right words. "Yes, sir. I've thought about it a lot," she said, her voice steady but soft. "And I've decided that I'd like to accept your offer." Dominic's eyes softened, and for a moment, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice sincere. "I want you to know that this isn't just about money or status. It's about recognizing your worth, and I think you deserve that." Maya felt a warmth spread through her at his words. They weren't just about the offer. It was about him acknowledging her as a person, something she had never expected from someone like him. She had spent so much of her life keeping her head down, accepting what was given to her, never asking for more. But now, Dominic had given her the power to choose her path. She hadn't expected this moment to feel so significant, but standing there, she realized how much it meant to her. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, the words coming from a place of deep gratitude. "I won't let you down." Dominic stood up and walked toward her, his expression thoughtful. "I believe you," he said. "And just so you know, I've already started working on getting you a position with more responsibility. You'll be in charge of overseeing some of the other staff, and I want you to have a say in how things are run around here." Maya blinked in surprise. She had never imagined that she would be given such a role, that she would have any authority in the house. "I don't know what to say," she replied, her voice filled with awe. "This is more than I ever expected." Dominic smiled, his expression genuine. "You've earned it, Maya. You've shown me more about kindness, dignity, and hard work than anyone else in this house. It's time you were recognized for that. Maya felt a lump in her throat. She had never been one to cry, but in this moment, the weight of the kindness he had shown her was overwhelming. She had always believed she was nothing more than a maid, a worker who had to stay in her place. But now, Dominic had given her the chance to prove that she was more than that. For the first time in years, Maya felt like she mattered. As the days passed, things began to change around the mansion. Maya stepped into her new role with a sense of purpose and responsibility that surprised even her. She found herself managing the other staff, organizing schedules, and helping Dominic with various tasks. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. And Dominic, for the first time, treated her as an equal. He respected her decisions, asked for her input, and recognized the value she brought to his home. There were still moments when Maya couldn't believe the changes that had happened. She would glance at Dominic from across the room, still surprised that this man, this powerful figure, had become someone she could speak to as an equal. And Dominic, for his part, found himself questioning everything he had built. The walls he had carefully constructed around himself were crumbling, piece by piece. He was beginning to see the world through a different lens, one where kindness, empathy, and respect for others mattered more than power and control. It was a slow process, but it was happening. And as Maya stood in the kitchen, watching the sun set outside the window, she realized that this was the beginning of something entirely new. A new chapter in her life. A new chapter in Dominic's life. A chapter where they could both see each other, not as master and servant, but as two. People with their own worth, their own dignity, and their own futures. The days since Maya had accepted Dominic's offer had passed quickly, but for both of them, they felt like a turning point in their lives. For Maya, it was as if she had stepped into a new world. No longer just the maid. She was now someone who was respected, someone who could voice her opinions, someone who mattered. She worked alongside the other staff, overseeing the house with newfound authority. It was strange at first. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but soon enough, it felt natural. As for Dominic, he found himself unsettled. The changes in Maya were noticeable, and the way he now interacted with her was different. She wasn't just the person who kept the house in order anymore. She was someone he could talk to, someone whose opinion mattered. He had to admit that her newfound strength and the way she carried herself had changed the dynamic in their house. He had never considered how much impact his words and actions could have on someone. Yet now, Maya had forced him to confront his own behavior, to look at himself in ways he hadn't wanted to before. Dominic had always seen himself as a man who controlled everything. He had built his empire with careful precision, focusing on power and authority. But over the past few weeks, he had realized that power wasn't everything. He had begun to value the people in his life, especially Maya, in ways that were completely new to him. But as Maya continued to thrive in her new role, something else began to surface. The other staff members started to notice the changes too. Whispers filled the halls. There were rumors that Maya had become more than just a maid, that Dominic was treating her differently, even with a degree of admiration. Some of the staff, especially those who had worked in the house for years, were skeptical. "I don't trust it," one of the butlers whispered to another. "You can't just change overnight. Maybe he's finally seeing what she's worth." The other responded, though with hesitation. "Maybe, but this? It's not normal." Maya overheard these whispers, and, for the first time, she didn't feel like shrinking away. She didn't feel ashamed. Instead, she stood tall and confident. She had earned the respect she now had, and no one could take that from her. She had worked hard for this moment, and she wouldn't let anyone undermine her. As days turned into weeks, Dominic and Maya's new dynamic continued to evolve. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. Dominic would occasionally ask for her opinion on things, whether it was about the staff or about the way certain tasks were handled. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about mutual respect. One afternoon, Dominic found himself sitting alone in his study, looking out the window at the sprawling estate. His thoughts were interrupted when Maya knocked on the door, her presence calm but firm. "Sir, I wanted to discuss something with you," she said, her tone professional yet warm. Dominic motioned for her to come in, surprised that she was taking the initiative to bring something up. "Of course, Maya. What's on your mind?" Maya stepped forward, her eyes focused on him as she spoke. "I've been thinking about how we can improve things around here. The staff has been working hard, but I think there are some areas where we could do better. Dominic raised an eyebrow, impressed by her boldness. He had never expected to have such a conversation with her, and yet here she was, offering solutions and taking charge. I'm listening, he said, leaning back in his chair. Maya took a deep breath and began outlining her ideas. She suggested some changes to the way the staff managed certain tasks, a more efficient way of organizing the schedules, and even some improvements to the overall atmosphere of the house. Her ideas were well thought out, practical, and, above all, showed how much she cared about the well-being of the people around her. As she spoke, Dominic found himself listening intently. This was the woman who had once been invisible to him, the one he had only seen as a maid. And yet here she was, offering valuable insights, speaking with confidence and clarity. For the first time, he realized how much he had underestimated her. When she finished, Dominic sat in silence for a moment, processing everything she had said. You've thought this through, he finally said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I have to say, I'm impressed. You've got a sharp mind, Maya. Maya smiled, her pride evident. Thank you, sir, she said. I've always tried to do my best. Dominic nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. Well, I think it's time we put some of these ideas into action. You've earned the right to take charge, and I'm giving you the authority to make these changes. Maya's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. Are you sure, sir? I mean, I didn't expect. I'm sure, Dominic interrupted. You've earned it. You've earned my trust and the trust of everyone in this house. Maya felt a wave of emotion rush over her. This was more than she had ever hoped for. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone with a voice, someone who had a place in this world beyond cleaning and serving. And Dominic, for his part, had finally realized that true power wasn't about control. It was about recognizing the value in others and treating them with the respect they deserved. The changes were slow at first, but as the weeks went by, the house became a more harmonious place. The staff worked together better, and even the atmosphere shifted. Maya had become not just a leader in the house, but someone who inspired the others. They began to see her differently, too. She wasn't just the maid. They saw her as someone who had earned her place in this world, someone who had the strength to change things for the better. Dominic, too, had changed. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about listening, respecting, and growing alongside others. And as he looked at Maya, now confidently taking charge and leading the staff, he knew that his life had been forever altered by the simple act of recognizing her worth. The changes in the Castellano household were undeniable. With Maya stepping into a more prominent role, the atmosphere shifted. Staff members no longer whispered behind closed doors. They worked together more efficiently, respecting one another in ways they hadn't before. Maya's leadership had brought a sense of unity and purpose that had never existed under the previous rigid structure. The transformation wasn't just in the way tasks were handled, it was in the way people interacted, the way they treated one another. For the first time, they felt seen. The newfound respect between Maya and the other staff members was palpable. Even Dominic couldn't ignore it. He had been watching from a distance, proud of how Maya had blossomed into the leader he knew she could be. But there was something else growing within him, something that had changed his perspective even further. He had been so focused on the mechanics of his world, his business, his empire, that he hadn't realized how much he had been missing. Maya had opened his eyes to something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. It was late one evening when Dominic found himself standing at the window of his study, gazing out at the sprawling grounds of his estate. He could hear the faint hum of activity below, the soft chatter of staff preparing for the evening. His thoughts wandered to Maya. He had spent so many years surrounded by wealth and power, yet it had been her quiet strength, her ability to care for others, that had made him see the world in a new light. He wasn't the same man he had been before. The realization hit him hard. He was no longer just a mafia boss running his empire. He was someone who had been given a second chance, someone who had learned to recognize the true value of those around him. It was then that he made a decision. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was as it had always been. The way he had treated Maya, no, the way he had treated everyone, was no longer acceptable. He had to make things right. The next morning, Dominic asked Maya to meet him in his study. He had planned to wait for her to come in, but instead, he stood by the door, his heart racing with anticipation. When Maya arrived, she was dressed in her usual simple uniform, her face composed as usual, though there was a slight nervousness in her eyes. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of caution. "Yes, Maya. Come in, please," Dominic said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. As she sat, he paced for a moment, unsure how to begin. For the first time in a long while, he felt vulnerable. He wasn't used to feeling this way, but Maya had made him realize something that he couldn't ignore any longer. "Maya," Dominic began, his voice steady, though there was an emotion in it that he couldn't quite mask. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About how I've treated you. About how I've treated everyone." Maya looked up at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Sir, when I first hired you, I saw you as just another member of the staff," Dominic said, his voice filled with a weight of regret. "I never truly saw you for who you were. I never saw your value." Maya opened her mouth to respond, but Dominic held up a hand to stop her. "Let me finish," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I've spent so many years believing that power was the most important thing, that control was everything. But you've shown me that I was wrong. You've shown me what real strength is. You've shown me that kindness, dignity, and respect are worth far more than any amount of money or influence." Maya sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She had always known that Dominic was a man of power, but hearing him speak like this was something she hadn't expected. "I've learned more from you than I ever did from any of my business dealings," Dominic continued, his eyes softening. "And I want to make it right. I want to give you something that you've earned, something that should have been given to you long ago." Maya felt a wave of emotion wash over her, and she had to steady herself. She had never expected this from him. She had always accepted her place in his world, but now, Dominic was giving her something she had never thought possible, his respect, his acknowledgement. "I'm giving you a stake in this business," Dominic said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've earned it. You've earned a place here, not just as someone who works for me, but as someone who is an equal." Maya blinked, stunned. She had always thought of herself as the help, someone who was never meant to rise above her station. But now, Dominic was offering her something she couldn't have imagined: power, influence, a chance to be part of the empire she had once only served. I don't know what to say, sir," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You don't have to say anything right now," Dominic said with a small smile. "I just wanted you to know that you've earned this. You deserve this." Maya's heart swelled with gratitude, but more than that, it swelled with a new sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged, like she was truly seen. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I won't let you down." Dominic nodded, his expression softening. "I know you won't, Maya." As she left the room, Maya felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. This wasn't just a new chapter in her life, it was a new beginning. And for Dominic, it was the first time in years that he felt truly free. Free from the constraints of power, free from the walls he had built around himself. He had learned that true strength lay not in control, but in compassion, in recognizing the worth of others, and in learning to respect the humanity of those around him. The weeks that followed Dominic's decision to give Maya more authority were transformative for both of them. The mansion, once a place of coldness and power, had slowly become warmer, more alive. Maya's new role brought her closer to the heart of the household, and she carried her duties with a sense of pride and responsibility. But as much as things had changed in the house, Dominic felt something deeper stirring within himself. His actions towards Maya had caused a ripple effect. It wasn't just the staff that was responding to the changes. It was his whole perspective on life, on power, and on people. Maya was no longer just the help. She had become someone he respected, someone he valued, and in turn, that respect had begun to influence the way others saw her. As the weeks passed, the shift was undeniable. The staff began to view Maya not just as the maid, but as an equal, as someone who had earned her place through hard work and wisdom. The whispers that had once existed about her role in the household began to fade, replaced by admiration. Some of the longtime staff even started to come to her for advice, respecting her judgment. The once quiet woman, who had spent years staying out of the spotlight, was now becoming the heart of the household. For Maya, the changes were even more profound. She had spent so many years being invisible, working tirelessly without acknowledgement, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. But now, Dominic had shown her a level of respect she had never expected. She was no longer just a servant in his eyes. She was a partner, someone whose voice mattered. And though she had accepted his offer with caution, she couldn't deny that it had changed her. She was no longer just surviving in his world. She was living in it. One evening, Dominic invited Maya to join him for dinner. It was a rare gesture. He had always kept his personal life and his work life separate, but now, it felt right to make her part of his world in a way he never had before. When Maya arrived at the dinner table, she was both surprised and humbled. As she sat across from him, she felt a sense of nervousness creeping in. This was different. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were two people who had built something together, who had found a new understanding of each other. The dinner was quiet at first, both of them eating slowly, but there was an underlying tension in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had come. Finally, Dominic put down his fork and looked at Maya, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "Maya," he began, his voice serious yet gentle. "I've been thinking a lot about how things have changed between us, and I have to say, I'm grateful. Grateful for your hard work, yes, but also for your honesty, your strength. You've changed this house, and you've changed me." Maya looked up at him, her heart fluttering. She hadn't expected such words from him. She had expected a polite acknowledgement, maybe a thank you. But this felt different. "I didn't expect things to change this much," Dominic continued, his gaze intense, but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "But I have to be honest with you. The respect I have for you is not just about the role you play here. It's about who you are. You've shown me that there's more to life than power and control. You've reminded me what it means to care for others, to treat people with kindness and dignity." Maya felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, but most of all, hope. She had never imagined that she would be sitting at a table like this, in front of a man like Dominic, hearing words that recognized her humanity. "I just want you to know," Dominic said, his voice firm, with a quiet sincerity, "that I respect you, more than I've respected anyone in my life. And that's not something I take lightly." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. She had spent so much of her life accepting less than she deserved, thinking it was the only way to survive. But now, Dominic's words, his actions, they were showing her that she could stand taller than she had ever thought possible. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I never imagined that my work here would lead to something like this." Dominic smiled at her, his eyes softening even more. "You deserve everything that's coming to you, Maya," he said. "You've earned it." That night, as Maya left the dinner table, she felt different. For the first time, she wasn't just leaving a job. She was leaving a place where she had been seen, where her worth had been acknowledged. She had built something with Dominic, and in the process, she had built something within herself. Dominic, too, felt a change. Watching Maya walk away, he realized just how much he had grown through their shared journey. He had started this as a man who saw everything through the lens of power, but now, he saw the world through the lens of respect and compassion. And for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt a peace he hadn't known before. The changes had made him question his life, his choices, and his priorities, but they had also given him something he hadn't known he was missing: genuine connection. As Maya walked away, the soft hum of the house behind her, she knew her life had taken a turn she could never have imagined. And as Dominic sat alone in his study, he realized that the changes Maya had sparked in him weren't just about power or business. They were about something far more important: humanity. The days following that dinner with Dominic and Maya were filled with new challenges and opportunities. Maya had taken her position as a leader in the house with grace, and she had earned not just respect, but admiration from everyone around her. It was no longer just about completing tasks. Now, people listened to her, sought her advice, and even looked up to her. But with that newfound respect came a responsibility she had never anticipated. The pressure to keep things running smoothly was constant. She had quickly learned that leading was not as simple as making decisions. It was about understanding the people around her, their needs, and how to balance all the pieces of a complex puzzle. She had to keep track of the schedules, manage conflicts among the staff, and ensure that everything was done with the level of excellence Dominic had come to expect. Yet despite the pressure, Maya found herself thriving. She no longer felt invisible. She felt powerful in a way she had never imagined. One evening, after another long day of overseeing the staff and managing tasks, Maya found herself walking the halls of the mansion, her thoughts heavy with the weight of her responsibilities. She had always dreamed of a life beyond cleaning and serving, but she hadn't expected this level of complexity. As she passed by Dominic's office, she saw the light under the door. He was still awake. Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should disturb him. But then she realized that their relationship had changed. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They were partners in some sense, both working together to make the household better. She knocked softly. "Come in," Dominic's voice called from inside. Maya opened the door, stepping inside the dimly lit room. Dominic was seated at his desk, a pile of paperwork in front of him. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Maya," he said, his tone warm. "What's on your mind?" Maya felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest, but she pushed it aside. "I wanted to talk to you about the staff," she began. "There's been some tension among the kitchen staff lately, and I think we need to address it before it becomes a bigger issue." Dominic raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by her initiative. "What do you think should be done?" he asked. Maya felt the weight of his question. She had never been asked for her input on such matters before, and yet here she was, leading the conversation. "I think we need to hold a meeting with the staff, listen to their concerns, and find a solution that works for everyone," she suggested. "It's important that they feel heard." Dominic leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "I trust your judgment," he said finally. "You take charge. Let me know how I can help." Maya nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. For the first time, she was in control, not just of the house, but of her future. As she left Dominic's office, she felt a rush of satisfaction. This was what she had worked for, what she had earned. But just as quickly, a sense of uncertainty crept in. What would the future hold for her now? Would Dominic always see her as an equal, or would things change as time went on? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let fear stop her from moving forward. The following morning, Maya called a meeting with the kitchen staff. As they gathered in the staff room, she stood at the front, her posture straight, her voice steady. "I know there have been some issues in the kitchen recently," she began, "and I want to hear from all of you. What's been going on?" There was a moment of silence before one of the cooks spoke up. "It's just been a lot of pressure lately," he said, his voice hesitant. "The orders keep piling up, and we don't have enough help." Maya listened carefully, nodding. "I understand, and I think we can find a way to make things easier for everyone." She spent the next hour listening to the staff's concerns, taking note of each one. By the time the meeting ended, Maya had come up with a plan to improve the workflow in the kitchen, streamline the process, and ensure that the staff had the support they needed. When she presented the plan to Dominic later that evening, he looked impressed. "You've done well, Maya," he said. "You're making this house run better than I ever could have imagined." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. This was the respect she had worked for, the trust that had been built through hard work and dedication. But despite the success of the meeting, something inside her still felt unsettled. As she walked through the hallways of the mansion, her thoughts turned to Dominic. Their relationship had changed so much over the past few weeks, and it wasn't just about the work anymore. It was personal. She had never expected to feel this way about him. He was her boss, someone who had once seemed untouchable, yet now he had become someone she could talk to, someone who saw her as more than just a maid. But the question still lingered in her mind. Was this just a fleeting moment of change, or would things return to how they once were? As the days went by, Maya found herself more and more at ease with the new dynamic between her and Dominic. She had earned her place in the house, and she was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. But deep down, she knew that her journey wasn't over yet. There was still so much to learn, so much to discover. And as she walked through the mansion, her heart full of hope, she realized that the most important thing wasn't just the power or respect she had gained. It was the connection she had formed with herself, with Dominic, and with the life she was now building. As the days continued to pass, the changes in the Castellano household were becoming more and more apparent. Maya's role had grown, and with it, her confidence. She had proven herself as a leader, not just in the eyes of the staff, but also in Dominic's eyes. The respect he had shown her had turned into something deeper, a bond that neither of them had expected. Yet, even with all the progress, something had been nagging at Dominic. It wasn't just the transformation of his household or the way Maya had taken charge. It was the growing connection between them. He had never allowed himself to become emotionally attached to anyone, least of all someone who had worked for him. But Maya was different. She wasn't just another employee. She had shown him a side of himself he had buried for years. His vulnerability, his humanity. And that scared him. He couldn't ignore the way he felt when he saw her, the way his heart would race whenever she entered a room. He had tried to keep his distance, to maintain the professional boundaries they had always had. But the more he tried, the more he realized he couldn't. One afternoon, Dominic sat in his office, papers scattered around him, but his mind wasn't on the business at hand. He couldn't stop thinking about Maya, how strong, intelligent, and compassionate she had become. He found himself wondering what it would be like if she weren't just the person who worked in his house. What if she were something more? The thought unsettled him, but it also made him feel a sense of longing, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had spent years closing himself off from the world, but now, with Maya, it felt as though he was opening up in ways he hadn't planned. Dominic had made a decision. He couldn't ignore this connection anymore. He needed to talk to her, to figure out where things stood between them. As he walked to the kitchen that evening, he found Maya standing near the stove, preparing dinner. She looked up as he entered, her face softening in recognition. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice calm yet warm. Dominic hesitated for a moment, unsure how to start, but he knew he couldn't delay it any longer. "Maya," he said, his voice steady, but with a hint of uncertainty. "I need to talk to you about something." Maya nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, sir. What's on your mind?" Dominic took a deep breath and stepped closer. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's changed recently, about how things have shifted between us." Maya's eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the moment hung in the air between them. Dominic swallowed, gathering his thoughts. "Maya," he continued, "the truth is, I've never felt this way about anyone before. Not in all the years I've been running this house, this business. I've always kept things professional, always kept my distance. But with you, it's different." Maya stood still, her heart racing. She had sensed something between them, but she hadn't expected him to say it out loud. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. Dominic looked down for a moment, gathering his courage. "I mean that I've developed feelings for you. And I know this isn't how it's supposed to be. You work for me, and we've always had a professional relationship. But I can't ignore how I feel. I respect you. I admire you. And I want to be honest with you." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this moment would come. She had always kept her distance, knowing the boundaries between them, knowing that there was a line she could never cross. And yet, here Dominic was, admitting something she had never expected. "Sir," Maya began, her voice soft but steady. I don't know what to say." Dominic reached out, gently touching her arm. "You don't have to say anything right now. I just needed to tell you how I feel. I don't want things to be awkward between us, but I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you." Maya stood there, her mind racing. She had always known that their connection was different, but she had never imagined it would come to this. She had always thought of herself as the maid, the one who worked in his house, serving him without question. But now, Dominic was telling her something that changed everything. She had to admit, a part of her had always admired him, his strength, his power. But she had never imagined that he might feel the same way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words, emotions they were both trying to process. Finally, Maya took a deep breath and met his gaze. "Dominic," she said, using his first name for the first time. "I don't know where this goes, but I'm not going to pretend I don't feel something too. You show me something I never expected, and I've grown to respect you in ways I never thought possible." Dominic's heart swelled at her words, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He had finally been honest with her, and with himself. And now, they both had the chance to figure out what this new chapter meant for them. As the evening wore on, they spoke more, not just about the changes in the house, but about their lives, their pasts, their futures. For the first time, they weren't just employer and employee. They were two people, connected by something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. It was the beginning of something new, something that neither of them could have predicted. And as the night drew to a close, Dominic realized that the greatest thing he had gained wasn't power or control. It was the ability to open himself up to someone else, to share his life, his heart, and his future. Maya, too, felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known before. She had never expected to find herself in this position, but here she was, standing beside Dominic, ready to face whatever came next. The next few weeks unfolded quietly but meaningfully, as both Dominic and Maya navigated this newfound dynamic. There were moments of tension, of uncertainty, but also of undeniable connection. Both of them had shifted, not just in their roles, but in the way they saw each other. Maya had always been strong, resilient, and capable, but now, she was feeling something she had never expected: freedom. The weight of her past, of always being just an invisible part of someone else's world, had been lifted. She no longer had to stay in the shadows. She was being seen and respected for who she truly was. As for Dominic, he was learning to step outside his cold, calculated persona. He had built his empire with force, fear, and control, but Maya had shown him that true power lay in compassion, trust, and humility. He had learned to let go of some of his old beliefs, allowing himself to be more open, more human. It wasn't an easy transition, but it was one he embraced. The change was gradual, but it was clear to both of them that this was no longer just about business. It was about their lives intertwining in ways neither of them had imagined. They found themselves spending more time together outside of their usual professional roles. It wasn't just business discussions anymore. It was conversations about their pasts, their hopes, and their futures. And each conversation brought them closer. But one night, as they sat together in the living room, something shifted. Maya had just finished organizing a new plan for the household, something that would streamline operations and ensure that everything was more efficient. It was one of the many things she had worked on recently, and Dominic had been impressed by her vision. But as she sat next to him, something felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air, a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but full of something unspoken. Maya, Dominic began softly, breaking the silence. She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. I've been thinking a lot about everything. The changes, the way things have been between us. Maya listened carefully, sensing the gravity in his tone. And, she asked, her voice steady but full of curiosity. Dominic hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, this time more firmly. I've realized that I've been holding something back. Something I can't ignore any longer. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had always been able to read Dominic's moods, and she knew something was coming, something that would change the course of their relationship again. What is it, sir? She asked, her voice gentle, though her pulse quickened. Dominic stood up slowly, walking toward the window, as though the words he needed to say were out there, in the dark night. Maya, I care about you. More than I should. More than I ever intended. The words hung in the air, thick with emotion. I know what you must think. I'm your employer, and this complicates everything. But I can't pretend anymore. I need to be honest with you. Maya's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had always kept her distance, knowing their roles, but now, he was admitting something that resonated deeply within her. She had always respected him, admired him even, but she never allowed herself to consider something more. Not because she didn't want it, but because she had never thought it would be possible. Dominic turned to face her, his gaze intense, yet vulnerable. Maya, he said, his voice softening. I want more than just this. I want something real. Something with you. She stood up slowly, unsure of what to say. Her mind was racing, trying to process the weight of his words. But you're my boss, she said quietly, as if repeating the reality she had always accepted. And you've always been distant from everyone. Dominic closed the distance between them, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before, uncertainty and longing. I know, and I've been wrong, he said, his voice earnest. I've pushed everyone away, kept myself closed off, but I can't do that with you anymore. You've made me realize that there's more to life than just control and power. There's connection, there's trust, and there's love. Maya felt the words settle into her heart, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to fall away. She had spent so many years feeling small, invisible. But now, Dominic was offering her something she hadn't dared to dream of. He was offering her his heart. She stood still for a moment, taking in everything he had said. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know where this will go, Dominic," she said softly. "But I know that I care about you too. More than I ever expected." Dominic's face softened, a look of relief and joy washing over him. He had been so afraid that his confession would push her away, but instead, she had done the opposite. She had met him halfway. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we can figure it out together," he said, his voice full of warmth. Maya smiled, her heart light. For the first time, she felt truly free, not just in her role, but in her life. She had always been afraid of stepping outside the boundaries she had set for herself, but now, with Dominic, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. They stood there for a moment, a quiet understanding between them. Neither of them knew where this new path would lead, but they knew one thing for sure. They were no longer just two people in different worlds. They had crossed a line, and the future was now something they would face together. In the weeks that followed their shared confession, things between Dominic and Maya evolved in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. What had begun as a mutual understanding of respect and admiration had slowly deepened into something more, something that neither of them had the words to describe at first. They spent their days working side by side, navigating the complexities of managing the house and the business. But in the quiet moments when they were alone, their connection was undeniable. They had found something that transcended the roles they once occupied. Maya was no longer just a maid, and Dominic was no longer just the powerful man who controlled everything. They were two people learning to see each other, not as employer and employee, but as partners in life. As their bond grew stronger, the dynamics in the house also shifted. The staff had begun to notice the subtle changes in how Dominic and Maya interacted with each other. Where once there had been a clear divide between those who worked for him and the boss himself, now there was a sense of unity, of mutual respect. Maya's influence had spread beyond her immediate role. She was now seen as a leader, someone whose judgment was respected by everyone in the household. Yet even with all the changes, there was a lingering question in the back of both their minds. What did this mean for the future? Neither of them had ever planned for their relationship to evolve in this way. Dominic had spent his life building an empire, one based on power, control, and order. But now, with Maya by his side, he felt a shift in his priorities. He was no longer just the Mafia boss. He was a man who had learned the value of kindness, compassion, and, perhaps most importantly, love. Maya, too, had undergone a transformation. She had always been strong, but her strength had been born out of necessity, of surviving in a world that didn't always see her. Now, she was strong because she had the support of someone who respected her, who valued her for who she truly was. But even as their relationship grew, both of them found themselves at a crossroads. Dominic knew that he had to take the next step to fully embrace what was between them. He had never allowed himself to get close to anyone before, not in a meaningful way. His life had been about keeping others at arm's length, about not allowing anyone to get too close. But with Maya, everything felt different. It was as if she had chipped away at the walls he had so carefully built around himself. And he knew that he couldn't let fear control him anymore. He had to face it, face what he felt, and take the next step. One evening, after a long day of working together, Dominic asked Maya to join him in the garden. The evening air was cool, the sky painted with soft hues of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Maya had agreed without hesitation, sensing the weight in his voice. As they walked through the garden, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the silence, Dominic finally spoke. "Maya," he began, his voice low, but steady, "I've been thinking about us. About what's been happening between us, and where we go from here." Maya turned to him, her heart racing. She had known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "I've never been one to do things halfway," Dominic continued, his eyes meeting hers. "And I can't keep pretending that this is just about work. It's not. I care about you. I want more than just this." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had known it all along. What had been building between them, what had been unspoken, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. "I care about you too, Dominic," she said softly. "But we have to think about what this means. It's not just about us anymore. There are people who will notice, people who will talk." Dominic nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know," he said, his voice firm. But I'm not afraid of that anymore. I've spent my whole life hiding behind my power, behind my title. But with you, I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be with you, not just as your boss, but as someone who truly values you. As someone who wants to build something real with you. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this day would come, but now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. She had always known that their connection was different, but now, Dominic was asking for something deeper, something more lasting. I'm not asking you to make a decision right away, Dominic continued, his voice softening. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this. To us. And I want you to be a part of my life in a way that goes beyond this house, beyond this role. I'm ready to face whatever comes next, as long as it's with you. Maya looked at him for a long moment, her heart full of emotions she couldn't fully articulate. She had never imagined herself in this position, never imagined that someone like Dominic would want to build a life with her. But here they were, standing together, facing the future. I don't know what the future holds, Dominic, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. But I'm willing to find out. Together. Dominic smiled, a sense of relief flooding through him. Together, he repeated, the word full of promise. And with that, the uncertainty that had lingered between them melted away. They didn't know exactly what the future would bring, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. The connection between them, built on trust, respect, and love, was stronger than anything they had ever known. And in that moment, they both knew that they had found something real, something worth fighting for. As the weeks passed, Dominic and Maya's bond deepened into something undeniable. Their relationship, which had begun with small, tentative steps, had now blossomed into something that was both comfortable and thrilling. The trust they had built was unshakable, and they had found in each other something that neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed: love, acceptance, and understanding. Life at the mansion continued to evolve, as did their roles. Dominic, once the man in charge of everything, had learned that true leadership was about giving others the space to thrive. Maya, once the invisible servant, had become a pillar of strength in the house, not only because of her work, but because of her heart. The power dynamic had shifted, but it was not an imbalance. It was an equal partnership. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Dominic turned to Maya. His expression was soft, yet there was a seriousness in his eyes. Maya, he said, his voice steady but filled with warmth. I've been thinking about everything we've been through, about how much we've changed and how much we've grown. Maya looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of affection and gratitude. I've been thinking about it too, she replied softly, and I know that I never expected any of this. I never thought this would happen, but now that it has, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Dominic reached out, taking her hand gently in his. I feel the same way. When we first started this, I never thought it would lead to something like this. I didn't expect to feel this connected, this alive. You've changed me, Maya. You've made me see the world differently. Maya's breath caught in her chest. I've never felt like this before either, she said quietly. You've helped me see that I'm more than just a servant, more than just a worker in your house. You've made me realize my worth, not just in the house, but in the world. Dominic squeezed her hand, his eyes searching hers. You've always had that worth, Maya. You were always worthy. I just needed to open my eyes and see it. There was a pause as they both sat in silence, the weight of their shared understanding filling the space between them. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. I know that what we have is unconventional, and I know that some people might not understand it. But I don't care about that anymore. I want you to be a part of my life, not just as my partner in this house, but in everything. I want to build a future with you. Maya felt tears welling in her eyes at his words, but she held them back, not wanting to show the vulnerability that she had hidden for so long. I want that too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to build a future with you, Dominic. They sat together for a while longer, enjoying the quiet and the warmth of their shared understanding. The world outside the walls of the mansion might not have fully accepted their relationship, but here, in this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had found, the love that had blossomed between them in spite of everything. As the days passed, their relationship only grew stronger. They found themselves spending more time together, not just in the house, but out in the world. Dominic, once too guarded to let anyone into his life, was now opening up, allowing Maya to be a part of everything he did. Maya, too, felt more confident than ever before. She no longer felt like an outsider in his world. She was part of it, just as he was part of hers. And as they moved forward, hand in hand, they knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, there would be obstacles. But together, they knew they could face anything. For the first time, they were both free from the roles they had been assigned, free to love each other without fear, and free to build a future that was truly theirs. And as they stood together, looking out at the world, they realized that this was just the beginning. The future was theirs to shape, and they would shape it together.